Right then guys, here I am for the third and final video in this trilogy of all seasons of F1 career mode videos. I've gone through F1 2012 and F1 2010's career modes previously, and finally I'm here with the much delayed F1 2011 video. Like with F1 2010 and F1 2012, I recorded the footage actually genuinely about a year ago now on the PlayStation 3, but I've also got the PC version of the game. I've considered going back and revisiting my F1 2010 and 2012 videos, and I really feel as if I should, since I think I now mostly understand how F1 2011's tiering system works thanks to the database editor. I haven't checked F1 2010's files, but I have seen F1 2012's, and it turns out many of the assumptions I made were wrong. My career mode didn't play out randomly, it went exactly as it logically should have done. So a massive thanks to Random Rexy on Twitter, who helped me to get to grips with the Ego database editor. As we know in real life, the 2011 season was a complete whitewash for Sebastian Vettel. In the first season of this career mode though, it was McLaren who started off the strongest with a 1-2 in Australia led by Lewis Hamilton, and Fernando Alonso finished the first race of this career mode on the podium. With a quarter of the season completed, it was Jenson Button, the runner-up in the real-life season, who was the championship leader. At Monaco though, he lost the Drivers' Championship lead to Mark Webber. Two great drivers in great cars, but it's odd that 6 races in and both of them are still ahead of Sebastian Vettel. Around halfway into the season at the British Grand Prix, Red Bull grabbed a 1-2 led by Vettel, and it was a bad day for Hamilton as he was beaten by his future teammate of Rosberg, who's in a lower tier car. But then again, Heifel beat Schumacher, so it wasn't all amazing for Mercedes. Vettel's win meant he jumped ahead of Button in the championship and was only 1 point behind Webber. Webber was able to hold on to the top spot in the Drivers' Championship and won the final race of the season, with 2011 still wisely having the final round at Interlagos. So Mark Webber is the 2011 Formula 1 World Champion, beating his teammate Sebastian Vettel by 15 points. Jenson Button ends the season in 3rd and only 4 points behind Vettel. Alonso's 4th, Hamilton 5th and Massa 6th, and the Brazilian is the final driver to accrue a triple figure points count. Contrary to real life, Schumacher beat Rosberg for 7th in the championship, and Heifel beat his teammate Petrov, with the Lotus Renault drivers the last to get into double figures. Kobayashi and Di Resta both got 2 points, with Perez and Sutil scoring a single point each. Unsurprisingly, neither HRT, Virgin or Lotus drivers scored any points. But more interestingly, both Williams and Toro Rosso drivers didn't score any either. All that matters with regards to the tiering system though is the Constructors' Championship. Red Bull won that with a 46 point advantage over McLaren, who themselves are 47 points ahead of Ferrari. Mercedes were more than 350 points behind Ferrari, but Lotus were in the same ballpark. Then it's another steep drop down from 112 points to just 3, which Sauber and Force India both scored, and then the remaining 5 teams all got nothing. As is the case in F1 2010 and F1 2012, all of the teams are split into tiers, and at the end of each season the best performing team in each tier gets promoted up and the worst team gets relegated down a tier. So Ferrari, as the lowest scoring of the 3 top tier teams, got relegated down to tier 2. In their place go Mercedes, who, just as they did in my F1 2012 career, earned themselves a spot in the top tier. Sauber beat Toro Rosso in the tier 3 battle, so Sauber are now a tier 2 team and Toro Rosso tier 4. Force India scored points whereas Williams didn't, so that explains the tier 4 battle, and Lotus, unsurprisingly, were the new team to get promoted up the order. According to this table, these are the different horsepower figures each of the teams have in each of the 5 tiers. So, and I checked this about 7 times, Force India really do start in tier 4 and they really do have more horsepower to begin with than either of the 3rd tier teams. Virgin didn't want me anymore, so I went over to HRT. Lotus also would have taken me on board, but I don't want to drag them back down to tier 5 since they could get promoted for a second season in a row. They have a 5 horsepower advantage over Toro Rosso, so it's genuinely possible. The Australian Grand Prix showed just how much has changed, as this time Button won the first race of the season, with both Red Bulls, Schumacher, Alonso in a tier 2 Ferrari and Rosberg all beating Lewis Hamilton. Kobayashi in a second tier Sauber crossed the line in 8th and ahead of Felipe Massa, who's also got a second tier car. Petrov for Lotus Renault was the last driver to score points as he beat Perez. Jarno Trulli for Lotus was a staggering 13th across the line and ahead of Paul di Resta. Meanwhile, Williams have indisputably become a bottom tier team as Barrichello was 19th and his best lap was 4.8 seconds slower than Buemi's and 5.8 seconds slower than Heikki Kovalainen's in a Lotus. Pastor Maldonado in the second Williams couldn't even do a sub 1 minute 30 lap time or finish ahead of D'Ambrosio in a Virgin. It's amazing how varied the race results can be given that we know the tiers and horsepower figures for all the teams. Alonso in a second tier Ferrari won the Chinese Grand Prix with Vettel second and Rosberg third to make it 3 different teams on the podium. Even Massa beat both McLarens as Button finished in 7th and Hamilton 8th. Then in Canada, Michael Schumacher won with the now top tier Mercedes car, and then it's both McLarens in 2nd and 3rd with Rosberg and the other Mercedes in 4th, and then both Red Bull drivers this time are down in 6th and 7th, and again behind Alonso. In Valencia, tier 2 Sauber didn't score any points, but 3rd tier Force India did. Adrian Sutil bested both Ferraris with a frankly astonishing drive to 7th place, and then his teammate Di Resta came home in 10th. Both Lotus Renaults beat Sauber, so I have no idea what happened to the Swiss team, but something went badly wrong. Hamilton won the Brazilian Grand Prix with Rosberg 2nd, Button 3rd, and then it's Vettel in 4th. Webber was down in 6th and even behind Schumacher. McLaren ended the season as the quicker team, but Vettel held on to win the Drivers' Championship by just 2 points over Hamilton. Button beat Webber to 3rd and Mercedes were the worst performing top tier team, but it's worth noting that Michael Schumacher outscored Nico Rosberg. Alonso got into triple figures with Massa 8th in the standings. Kobayashi and Perez for second tier Sauber round out the top 10 with Di Resta the last to get into double figures. Fair play to Jarno Trulli who scored a point in that awful Lotus car. Then again, that's why he's the 9th greatest F1 driver of all time, supposedly. His teammate and the 8th greatest driver ever to grace the sport also scored a point and was the last to do so, but disappointingly that wasn't quite enough to get the team promoted up to tier 3. They tied on points with Toro Rosso, and whilst Alguersuari didn't accrue any points, Buemi got 2, and that, and only that fact, prevented Lotus from being promoted 2 seasons in a row and being in a higher tier than Lotus Renault. So with the promotions and relegations carried out, the hierarchy now looks like this. That seems like how it started, but not quite. The only difference from the first season is that Force India are now in tier 2 and Lotus Renault down in tier 4. In the team's first race in the second tier, Paul di Resta beat Michael Schumacher to 8th, and his teammate Sutil also scored a point in Australia. Malaysia was even better for Force India as di Resta grabbed 7th and Sutil 8th with Mercedes in 9th and 10th. Both Red Bulls meanwhile crossed the line behind both Ferraris. The British Grand Prix is worth mentioning because Petrov scored 2 points for Lotus Renault, and that's despite the team now being 10 horsepower down on what they had in the first season and in tier 4. Jenson Button took another victory with both Red Bull drivers behind both Ferraris yet again. Hamilton though had a strangely dismal race as he was 6th across the line. So, about halfway into the season, Hamilton's 4 points back from second place Vettel, but Button is leading the Drivers' Championship with a margin of 28 points. Button fell off towards the end of the season as he claimed only 5th at Hungary. That's still better than his teammate Hamilton, who was 7th and behind Di Resta. Crucially, it wasn't long after then that Sebastian Vettel took over the lead of the Drivers' Championship from Jenson Button. At Singapore, Hamilton clawed back some respectability for himself and McLaren as he won the Grand Prix with both Red Bulls either side of him on the podium, and then Button in 4th. More interestingly though, Kamui Kobayashi for Sauber was 7th and his teammate Sergio Perez 9th. Schumacher, Rosberg and Sutil all failed to score points with second tier machinery, and Kobayashi was the highest placed driver not in a top tier car. His best lap was even a shade better than Massa's. That is one hell of an achievement. Heading into the final round of the third season, just 2 points separated Vettel and Button. So either Sebastian Vettel was going to hold on to his slim lead and win his second Drivers' Championship in this career save, or Jenson Button was going to be the third different champion in 3 seasons. Massa both surprisingly and impressively won his home Grand Prix, but the key fact is that Vettel made it onto the podium and Button didn't, making Sebastian Vettel a triple world champion if you include his real life 2010 title as well. Massa was only 13 points behind Alonso in the Drivers' Championship at the end, which is less than the gap between Webber in 4th and world champion Vettel. Schumacher got the better of Rosberg for the 3rd year in a row, and frankly, I'm surprised that both Mercedes drivers outscored Di Resta and that Sutil was only 4 points adrift of his teammate. Kobayashi and Perez scored all of their points in Singapore, and Petrov, Barrichello and Heidfeld were the last to score any points. McLaren briefly lost the Constructors' Championship lead to Red Bull, but took it back again before the end of the year to win for the 2nd time in a row. Apart from that, it went as expected, except Tier 3 Toro Rosso didn't score any points, whilst both Tier 4 teams of Lotus, Renault and Williams did. To be fair, Toro Rosso still had less power than Lotus Renault despite being in a higher tier, but then again the same could be said for Sauber, but they still scored 7 points, albeit all from a single event. The Constructors' Championship standings changed the tiers from this to this. If that looks familiar, well, that's because that's exactly the same tier list we had in the 2nd season. For this season, I joined Tier 4 Malaysian Lotus, the intention being to talk about my first experience with a non-bottom tier team and one that dragged themselves out of it in the first place. All you need to know though is that I passed the R&D objective in China in each of the previous 3 seasons, with HRT and Virgin respectively, but with a Tier 4 Lotus, the target time was obviously shorter, but I simply couldn't beat it. Yet, in the final year, I went over a second a lap quicker than I did in the Lotus to pass the exact same time in a 4th tier Williams. That's despite the fact the Lotus in Tier 4 has 725 horsepower and the 4th tier Williams only 715. Both with default setups, I got the Williams to run at 210 miles an hour, but the Lotus only ever got up to 205 miles an hour. So the car with less power had the better top speed, never mind overall lap time. Rapid fire, here's the most notable moments from the 4th season. Nico Rosberg won at Monaco, an improvement from 4th place, which is what he achieved in the 2nd season. In Valencia, it was a McLaren 1-2, Vettel finished down in 6th, Di Resta was 7th in the 3rd tier Force India and 1 place in front of Massa in the 2nd tier Ferrari. Heidfeld was 9th, Sutil 10th, and double world champion Fernando Alonso couldn't even make it into the top 10. All of that means Massa at this point in the season had 16 more points than Alonso. Nick Heidfeld also had a storming start since he was on 5 points, which is 2.5 times more than his teammates' total and more than he accrued in the entirety of the second season. At the sharp end of the pack, Red Bull somehow found another gear as they ended McLaren's streak of Constructors' Championships and brought the honours back to Milton Keynes with a race to spare. Red Bull locked out the front row in Brazil, but yet again rain played havoc with the end results as Button won with Schumacher 2nd, Webber 3rd and Vettel down in 6th. That was still more than enough for the German to win his 3rd Drivers' Championship on the bounce and become without a doubt the top driver at Red Bull despite Mark Webber winning the inaugural championship in this 5-season run. Generally speaking, the 4th season ended in much the same way the second one did. There are some changes, with Webber and Hamilton swapping places, Rosberg outscored Schumacher and Perez beat Kobayashi for the first time in 4 seasons, and neither Toro Rosso and Lotus drivers scored any points. In the second season, both 4th tier teams had 2 points to their name, but that wasn't the case this season and only 7 teams scored any points at all. As previously established, Red Bull ended at the top of the Constructors table with 75 points more than McLaren, and that's the only positional change from season 2 to 4. With that being the case, it's no surprise that the tier groupings for the 5th and final season are exactly the same as they were in season 3. Since this is season 3 all over again, you would assume there's very little to say about it. Well, as it turns out there is, and it's a shame there isn't a 6th season in this game because I would love to have seen what followed on from this year. Malaysia saw an all McLaren and Ferrari top 4 with Adrian Sutil in 5th and ahead of both Red Bulls. Frankly, both Force Indias crossing the line ahead of both Mercedes is impressive, but Sutil beating both Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel is an undeniably phenomenal achievement. Red Bull picked themselves back up in Istanbul, but Felipe Massa won the Grand Prix. Yet again Force India trumped Mercedes, but more embarrassingly, 7-time world champion Michael Schumacher was beaten to the final points place by Sebastian Buemi in a Tier 3 Toro Rosso. In the 3rd season, Toro Rosso didn't score any points, and Mercedes were better than Force India, so this is hardly Season 3 Mark II. By the time you get to Monaco, it's clear that even though this is the 5th season, so would theoretically be 2015, we seem to have somehow gone back in time to 2008. Lewis Hamilton won the Monaco Grand Prix and Felipe Massa finished in 3rd, exactly where they were classified in the 2008 race there. Also, it's worth noting that Nick Heidfeld scored points with a 9th place result despite driving a 4th tier Lotus Renault. This was the only time he scored points all year, so in that sense it isn't really like 2008. This was by far the most exciting season yet, and it would be a joy if this happened in real life, since this even eclipses the 2010 season. After the British Grand Prix, the Drivers' Championship looked like this, with Hamilton on top but only 3 points ahead of both Alonso and Webber, with Button 6 points adrift and Massa 9. Staggeringly, it's Vettel who's on the back foot as he's 6th in the standings, but even then he's only 13 points off the top. Ferrari won the final race of this 5-season long career mode, but it wasn't Massa as he succumbed to the Brazilian home race curse and was the last top tier driver to cross the line, so Fernando Alonso took the honours instead. 3rd for Hamilton and 5th for Button meant McLaren bottled the chance to be officially the most successful team in this career save and instead gave the 5th season's Constructors title over to Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton ends the 5th season on 313 points and as the world champion, with Felipe Massa as the runner-up, but the Brazilian still outscored Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso, which I would not have bet on ever happening. Rosberg beat Schumacher for the 2nd year in a row, but the real achievements are those by Vitaly Petrov, Nick Heidfeld and Sebastian Buemi. All 3 scored at least 1 point this year and none of them had a great car yet. Kamui Kobayashi in the 3rd tier Sauber didn't get any despite scoring 6 in the 3rd season. Barrichello didn't get any points either in the 4th tier Williams, yet got a couple 2 years ago. but I was his teammate, so I'll give Williams as a whole the benefit of the doubt, since who knows, Pastor Maldonado might have been amazing this year. Quite frankly, it would not have been that odd given everything else that happened in this season. Just 24 points splits the top 3 teams, and were there to be a 6th season, it would have been Red Bull who would be down in tier 2. Ferrari would have been the defending champions, but their title still means all 3 of the teams that start in the top tier won a Constructors' Championship. 4th tier Lotus Renault scored 6 points, triple that of Sauber in the tier above them. Brilliant but meaningless since there's no 6th season, and even if there was, all Lotus Renault had to do was finish ahead of Williams, which they did, and Sauber were in direct competition with Toro Rosso and beat them anyway. All 4 teams that have less than 720 horsepower, so that's HRT with 700, Virgin with 705, 4th tier Williams with 715 and bottom tier Lotus with 718 horsepower, all scored nothing at all. That's the end of the career and the final video in my trilogy covering the era of Codemasters F1 games which feature the tiering system. Fair to say it pales in comparison to what we've had in the recent games with a full-on R&D mechanic, but I actually quite like the tiering system. Shame Codemasters never mentioned it, since I think it would have helped the profile of these games at the time, certainly for me anyway, and it's sad they got rid of it in F1 2013. I may well revisit the tiering system in the future, and certainly the game wants me to, because the career mode ends and then wraps back around Groundhog Day style with David Croft having forgotten who I am. It would be great to go over F1 2010, 11 and 12 again and actually take part in some races to see how much the tiering system changes the on-track experience. If I ever do that, then that will be a way off in the future, but until then I'll see you guys in my next video.